the defense primes have run a masterful campaign. They've said, we're going to do our part. We will consolidate so there's only, 5 or 6 of us that can win these major weapons acquisition programs. But the agreement that we're asking for from the Pentagon is don't let anyone else come to the table. In the Anduril case, we were the fastest since the Korean War to go from company stand-up to program of record. The kind of craziest kind of aspect of this is that me, Palmer, and Brian actually met with the customer, the person that signed off on that program of record 3 days into the company. The reality is, if we got into a hot conflict with a great power, we would run out of munitions in a week.
Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Trae Stephens. Trae is a partner at Founders Fund and co-founder and current executive chairman at Anduril. Trae, welcome to World of Devs.
Hey, Auren. Good to see you.
Great to see you as well. Now, what does a new modern day defense company look like, or what should it look like?
There's probably a lot of different things it could look like. We saw over the last 20 years what happened with SpaceX, which is, a space launch company, satellites as well. And then you have a company like Palantir that's all about data infrastructure that has a huge business in defense and intelligence. And Anduril is kind of a very different form of company in this space. We're focused on software-defined, hardware-enabled major weapons programs. So everything from surveillance and reconnaissance to kinetics to autonomous systems on undersea, on the surface of the sea, on the ground, in the air, and in space. So I think the biggest lever that you'll see out of the defense technology space is really about how to create products that are leveraging private capital rather than taxpayer capital to develop capabilities and then sell them at lower costs than the alternative of doing an in-house build inside the government, which is the way that these things have been done for the last 60, 70 years.
And one of those things of those three companies is that they're all, even though they may have some very good people in the DC area, almost all the executives and the product people are based outside the DC area. Is that where you think more and more of these companies will be going in the future?
Yeah, there's all of these companies have a large presence in Washington, D.C.
Of course, yeah, that's the sell and
Palantir,
service, yeah.
Yeah. At Palantir, our second largest office over the entire history of the company was in DC. That's probably not the case at SpaceX anymore, given Brownsville, but it's probably the third largest office for SpaceX.
Yep.
And it's definitely the second largest for Anduril as well. There is some engineering work that has always happened in DC at these companies, but the core engineering research and development capability is back at headquarters, generally. I think that, the reason for this is largely cultural. I think there are talented engineers that are based in the Beltway. They're just trapped inside of a bureaucracy that doesn't value them in the same way that they're valued in a traditional kind of Silicon Valley company. And I don't mean Silicon Valley geographically, I mean culturally Silicon Valley. And so I wouldn't anticipate that would change. I don't think.
A lot of the defense primes, that you have to clock in and clock out. Everybody actually has to time keep, which is I don't know, it just seems very much of a nanny state thing. And maybe there's a reason for that or something. But just I wouldn't want to work at a company like that just for that one reason.
Yeah, we had this. This was a major thing that we tried to work out culturally at Palantir in the early days. Is when you have bodies on contracts, you do have to time keep and submit your hours and things like that. And we had to figure out processes and machinery inside of the company to abstract that away from the engineers who were morally offended by the idea
they would
that
just
they
quit
needed to
if that
do that.
happened.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So that was a real thing that we had to deal with at Palantir back in the day.
Now, if you think of Palantir, SpaceX, and Anduril, one of the other things they all have in common is they're all founded by billionaires. And I don't know what we're thinking, but if we're long-term want to be a great society and have great defense, I don't know that all of our great defense companies are going to be able to be founded by billionaires, or maybe that will be the case. What do you think? How do you think that is going to be the case going forward?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's random chance. I think it is actually kind of a bug in the system that is what it is, unfortunately.
And I don't think it's just the billionaire. It's also that they were rock stars. the
Hmm.
founders are like these famous people that I imagine like generals want to meet. And so maybe they're able to, maybe it wasn't just the money, but it's the fact that they are fame and they're known for being these creative individuals that was able to get them, through the very hard early stages of procurement.
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it. I mean, this is one of two things that I think that brings. The first thing that the billionaire founder brings is it makes it much easier to raise capital,
Yes, for
for
sure.
better or for
Yeah,
worse.
yeah, and you need a lot of
And
money to make
and
these
you
things
need a lot
happen.
of money. Both Palantir and SpaceX took over 5 years to get to 10 million in revenue. These are like things that
Jeez, that's
you
crazy. Yeah.
really need to have some sort of capital advantage. But then to your point, the second major advantage is that members of Congress want to meet you. It's much easier to score meetings with the people that are moving the money
Yep.
around in the system. And that is definitely an early advantage. In the Anduril case, we were the fastest since the Korean War to go from company stand up to program of record inside the federal government. It was just over 2 years. And the kind of craziest kind of aspect of this is that me, Palmer, and Brian actually met with the customer, the person that signed off on that program of record, 3 days into the company.
Oh wow. Okay.
And so that's the sort of advantage that you get from having the billionaire co-founder and people that have
Yeah.
experience in the space before, is that you're not playing the like, how many degrees separated from Kevin Bacon do I need to get to
Right. Like
the
who would
person, the
not want to
decision
meet
maker.
Palmer Luckey? Like, of course you want to
Exactly.
meet him. Like, I mean, he's just
Exactly.
like amazing, right? So that's like, but like but the Palmer Luckey before he was Palmer Luckey, or the Elon Musk before he was Elon Musk, like they're going to have a very hard time starting something in the defense world. Or do you think it's still possible? It just like they just have to deal with the more difficult things that they have to deal with.
I think it's possible. It's certainly like being able to stand on the shoulders of the companies that have gone before you is
Yep.
really helpful. I think our run at Anduril was largely predicated by lessons learned from SpaceX and Palantir, and that
And
was a
now we
huge
have
asset.
three, and then it's just a little bit easier to have the fourth once you have three.
Exactly. But at the same time, as you well know, category investing is tough. Like if you were a
Yeah,
space investor and you didn't invest in SpaceX, you probably lost money. If you're a
that's
crypto
right.
investor and you didn't invest in Coinbase, you probably lost money. If you're a
Yep.
social media investor, you didn't invest in Facebook, you probably lost money. And so I think there is a bit of a weird dynamic going on in the marketplace right now where people have this belief that like, oh, defense tech is wide open, like we're going to build 20 Palantirs. And that just flies in the face of everything that we've learned about the parallel nature of venture capital over the last 50 years. I just don't expect that that will be the case. It will, the more competitive the environment gets, the higher the prices for these companies get bid up, the harder it is for venture investors to make returns. And everything is just going to be a race to the bottom. So I'm not really sure that from a category perspective, it becoming slightly easier is necessarily the boon that everyone thinks it is.
Now, for a company like Anduril, because it's really it really is about defense. Like it has to sell to the government. The government is the main customer. But
Mm.
you could reimagine a Palantir where the first customer is J.P. Morgan, and then like over time, like it sells more to the defense and national security type customer, or you can match like a or you can like Snowflake is doing now, right? Where Snowflake probably sells into to the national security customer today. Can you like if you saw a company that was trying to sell into both, would you just say don't do it, just sell into one first and get to 100 million in revenue and then try to sell into the other, or what would be your advice to a company
I mean, both Palantir and SpaceX, an enormous chunk of their business is commercial.
correct
At Palantir, it's about 50-50, I think, from
today?
a
But
revenue
it was
perspective.
it started off much more B2G, right? Or no?
It did, yeah, which is
Yeah,
where I was going with this.
yeah,
I think you can choose your adventure at the beginning. You're either like hard commercial or hard government,
yeah.
but trying to mix the two of them is not generally a great idea. One kind of crazy story that I'll tell, that was a bit of a research project for me a few years back, is I was trying to understand where this term dual use came from. It gets thrown around a lot in government circles. There's like entire acquisitions programs that are focused on acquiring dual use technologies. And if you go back to during the Cold War, you'll find that this term was only used in reference to nuclear technology transfer. Like they would talk about it as like, nuclear has a dual use. It has a power
Yeah.
usage, and it has the weapons program usage. And that was it. That was the only appearance that it made a congressional record. Famously, in the summer of 1994, there was this kind of seminal event in defense history that
This
has
is
become
like the Last
colloquially known
Supper.
as the Last Supper. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Last Supper is where Secretary of Defense pulled together all the CEOs of the defense companies and said, the Cold War is over, spending is going to go down, consolidate or die, and basically challenged them to go out and merge and become more efficient. So October of that year, so just a few months after the Last Supper, you started seeing the term dual use getting thrown around a lot. Like it started appearing in congressional record, but used in a different way. It was being used as a defense for all other applications, commercial and defense applications for all sorts of technologies.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video.
And my hypothesis, given the increasing usage of that over the last now 30 years, is that the defense primes have run a masterful campaign. They've said, we're going to do our part. We will consolidate. So there's only, 5 or 6 of us that can win these major weapons acquisition programs. But the agreement that we're asking for from the Pentagon is don't let anyone else come to the table.
Yeah.
And so dual use is a pejorative. It's the defense prime's way of saying, these are people that can sub as vendors on our contracts, but they cannot compete. And you saw how that came up with SpaceX, with being blocked from bidding on national security launch programs by ULA. And it came up with Palantir, with the distributed common ground system contract with the Army, where they were saying, look, Palantir, maybe it's a dual use capability. It can't win a major program.
Yeah.
And so I try to always remind people, like, dual use is not real. Like if you are a seed stage or a Series A company and you're running around saying like, I'm a dual use capability, I have equally selling to federal as I am to, commercial use cases with oil and gas companies or whatever, you have been hoodwinked. The primes have done what they've wanted to do, which is prevent you from being a credible threat to them on their cash cows. So Anduril is not doing that. We will look more like Lockheed Martin than we will Palantir or SpaceX. We're going to have 97+% of our business government, and we are going directly at these major defense acquisition programs head to head against traditional players in the industry.
Now, why does like Department of Defense outsource like almost everything? Like I get like the super high tech stuff like Anduril, like you got to go buy that. Like that's not something you're going to build internally, but like they have all these contractors that are like cooks. They pay contractors to buy ammunition for them. Like, why do they like it's historically you'd have like cooks in the army, or you'd have somebody in the army who like knows how to buy ammunition. Like not everybody is like a shoots guns in the army. Like they do other stuff, but it seems like the army really wants to outsource everything except the people that shoot.
Yeah. And, this wasn't always the case. Like the government literally used to own and operate munitions factories. That was
Right.
like part of our
It still kind
history.
of technically does in a weird way, right? Like they still own a bunch of factories. I don't know if they operate them, but they do own a bunch
Yeah.
of factories around the country.
Yeah, there's not to mention like test ranges, and the labs are building like actually like the kinetic payloads for missiles and stuff like that. But yeah, I think there's just like this complete change where during the Cold War there was this realization that things weren't being run super efficiently. And they decided to shift as much as possible to these cost plus contracts because they felt like they were being extorted by industry. So if they could just agree on like a fixed margin on top of whatever the cost of a program was, well, surely that would make us more efficient. Now, what it didn't do is it didn't protect against the deterioration of the incentive structure, where now things, there are always cost overruns and time overruns because the incentive structure that you set up rewards that behavior.
Yeah, the cost plus is just like stupid. Like I don't understand. I understand like the reason why they did it, but I don't understand the reason why they've kept it.
Well, at this point, I feel like it's very, very hard to change. These are huge publicly traded companies. Their investors have like a clear expectation for how they're supposed to be doing their business. the margins that they should be getting off of these programs, how they do accounting on these programs. If you were to like snap your fingers and say, Lockheed Martin, I need you to go from 1.5% revenue IRAD spending to 20% IRAD spending, and then do everything firm fixed. Like how would that work in the public markets? Like
Yeah.
there would just be
But I
no
mean, but if you
understanding of
think
how
of
that would
like
happen.
so right now, like Department of Defense, they'll go hire a 25-year-old consultant from Booz Allen who doesn't live in the DC area to maybe they live in Chicago or something, and they fly them to the DC area every week. They put them up in a hotel. Um, and then that person helps them buy ammunition or whatever that person does. And I'm sure it's a smart person, but they could just hire that person. And so they're probably paying all in like 1.2 million a year for that person. They could hire a very smart person for a lot less than 1.2 million a year, especially a 25-year-old. Now I understand like part of the reason that they do it is now they can fire them and they can hire at will and they can do all these things that they don't have the flexibility of doing in the normal government. But why don't we just like give them the flexibility and then they could just do what they want and not have to pay 1.2 million a person.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly hard to like create some sort of arbitrary justification for why they're doing things the way they're doing, because I think most people would agree that it's broken. On the Booz Allen side of things, the crazy thing is, did you know they are the largest? They hold the largest AI contract across the entire federal government. Booz
Yeah,
Allen,
yeah, it's crazy.
not
Like
OpenAI, not
yeah,
Palantir.
yeah,
Booz
yeah.
Allen
And
Hamilton.
there's no amazing AI person that's going to go work for Booz Allen. I'm sorry.
No, of
I
course
mean, like
not.
I know some nice people that work at it, but like I've never met like a great AI person who's like, oh yeah, I'm going to work for Booz Allen. Like there are zero great AI people at Booz Allen. I know someone's going to sue this podcast for me saying that, but I will go on record and be very, very confident that there's no great AI people who work at that company.
No, it's actually funny. We hired a lot of people out of Booz Allen at Palantir back in the day, including my co-founder at Anduril, Matt Grimm. Um, we used to say that Booz is a great first job, and the best way to find really talented people to hire for Palantir was find people who were super smart and realized how dumb it was to work at Booz Allen. And so it was,
Right, but if they're there for
it
more
was,
than a few years, you
if they're
probably
there
that's
for
it's too late. Yeah, yeah,
this is actually the same thing with officers. Like, a 5-year contract in the military as an officer, you should end as a captain. Like, if you go through the wickets and you progress and get
all right.
promoted, you should end those 5 years as a captain. And so, in some ways, if you leave as a major, it means you stayed after 5 years, which is like, well, why did you do that? What was motivating you to extend your contract beyond five
That
years?
one I understand more because there are certain things you can do in the army that you can't do anywhere else in the world. I mean, there are certain there's like they have a they're so if you really care about service, I could understand someone staying all the way to general because they're really a dedicated public servant. Booze is a different example. Like I
I
just
mean,
don't understand that one.
that is
Yeah,
a
yeah,
very generous explanation.
yeah,
I started my career in the intelligence community, and I think if I had stayed there for 6 years instead of 2.5, I would have walked away with like very different kind of a very different culture about my expectations. Like, once you've been living in a system and you become indoctrinated in a system, it's really tough to break out
yeah.
and
That's true.
change your expectations around performance and things like that. So, we always, when we hire people out of the military, our general kind of guidance is the captains are going to be your best option. That's like the
Okay.
highest talent, because they stayed exactly as long as they needed to, and then they realized that there was something that was broken that they really cared about going and fixing in the private sector.
Okay, well, I have hired a decent number of captains in my life. I didn't realize this, and they all actually were really good.
Yeah, I'm telling you,
It's a good point.
it's a bit of a
I
shortcut. It's a
yeah,
bit of a
yeah,
shortcut.
it's actually a good point. That's pretty interesting. Now, on the geopolitics war, like it seems like the foreign policy establishment, at least this is my opinion, I don't want to put words in your mouth, has gotten most of the very big things wrong over the last 25 years. Maybe it got a lot of little things right, but the big things, Iraq and some of this other stuff wrong. Um, First of all, do you agree with that? And if you do agree, like, why is it the case? Like, these are smart people. Like, why is that the case?
I think that they're pretty idiosyncratic. Like, I'm not sure that there's like a single thing that led to these individual cases going wrong. Um, obviously we had to do something in response to 9/11.
Yep.
I'm not sure that like, occupying entire nations in the Middle East was the right approach, but I think our, the mission alignment with what we were trying to do by eradicating the, state-sponsored terrorism was the right instinct. It just obviously didn't play out as we probably would have expected it to. I think a lot of what causes these things to happen is like, you know, a misunderstanding of what our role in the world should look like. And, an incredibly volatile, but intentionally volatile political environment where you're constantly flipping back and forth between parties. You have political appointees that, you know, realistically probably only end up spending 2, 3 years in their role. We have no long term plan. And I think if you went in kind of the way that China has done with the it's more of a marathon than a sprint. And they've laid out kind of a many decades plan for where they want to be. And when you have that sort of articulated strategy and you have pretty consistent leadership, my guess is that it's easier to, you know, go out and achieve some sort of longer term goal. I'm not saying that that's like what we should
Yeah.
be aspiring to. Like, I actually think the
But
democratic system is
even,
much better.
even if you just say like the Bush years, which was like somewhat of a consistent government with a consistent goal and et cetera, over those 8 years, like it seemed like they got a lot of things wrong. And then when they even did those things, they prosecuted them wrong too. So it's like in the two
Yeah.
by two, you want to have like good strategy versus bad. But if you have bad strategy, at least you want to have good execution, not bad, right? And I think they had like bad and bad in many
Yeah,
cases.
the
Yeah.
mission accomplished banner was definitely
Yeah.
misplaced.
Yeah.
But no, I actually think that the George W. Bush administration, they really believed what they were doing was the
Of
right
course
thing.
they did.
They
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
believed that, you know people deserved to, have democratic institutions and to experience
They were
Western views on
Wilsonian at
freedom.
the core. Yeah.
Totally. And
Yeah.
and I think the real challenge with that is that I think we all learned during that time period that you can't, fast track the Enlightenment. Like, we had
Yeah.
500 years
There
of
was no Thomas
Enlightenment. No,
Jefferson
there was
there
no,
and,
exactly,
Alexander
exactly.
Hamilton and stuff. Yeah. What is it our hubris? Is it that is it we're getting lobbied by different, internal and external forces that move us into these positions? Is it like what why do we make these, mistakes? And by the way, they're because we're so big, they're all recoverable. If a smaller, more fragile a country made these mistakes, like the whole country would topple. For us, it's like, it's just like a little blip. It was like a
Yeah. So
1 week news cycle when we pulled out of Afghanistan. you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
know,
No, it's a good question. I definitely think that, hubris has a role to play with that, and I think a lot of times that gets kind of wrapped in with, question about our role on a global sphere, given, the power dynamics that have, at least the power dynamics that have existed since the end of the Cold War. Obviously, there's like a very new paradigm emerging with the rise of China, but I think there were people that, not to riff on a, a great movie from 20 years ago, Team America World Police, but I think that there are a lot of people that actually thought like, yeah, maybe we should be Team America World Police. Like, we want, to maximize justice and freedom in the world. And when we see injustice, like, we should go tamp it down. Um, you could still today in 2025 make a credible argument for why that's the case. Obviously, the current administration is kind of drawing a line and saying we are not Team America World Police, and they have their own reasons for believing that, their own philosophies. But I believe that because we have this political system that shifts very, rapidly, both in Congress and in
yeah.
the judiciary and in the presidency, you get this kind of crazy vacillation between these kind of core philosophical foreign policy ideas. And does that increase the rate at which we make mistakes? Maybe. Does it decrease the likelihood of explosion into total war? I don't know. Maybe that is kind of a stop on the system as well.
And what are is the if we think of our big kind of like the big thing that I assume that everyone is worried about in national security is this kind of like great power conflict between the U.S. and China. These are near peers. They're a very smart adversary. Um, how do we build the resilience and the defense without tripping it over into a hot war?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the core concept that is what we've been working on at Anduril, and it's what we believe deeply philosophically, is in deterrence.
Yeah.
Like you want, as Reagan said, you want to have peace through strength. If we have such a monumental advantage technologically, militarily, in theory, it would be really unwise for our adversaries to test that advantage.
Yes.
And I think we've seen like the longest stretch of relative peace since the end of the Cold War, and I think that was largely the cause of the United States having this kind of monopoly on power in the world. That said, I think the other part of this is that we've kind of agreed as a culture and society that these like threshold conflicts are somehow more acceptable. That as long as you have a conflict that runs over many years and is much lower intensity and doesn't trigger us into nuclear conflict, that like maybe somehow that's better. I think if you look at the data,
Essentially, it's really about and I would say in the U.S., it's also about the body count, right? So as long as the body count is relatively quote unquote low and quote unquote acceptable, and there's not as many people complaining about it, and we don't have to do a draft, all these other types of things too, I imagine are part of it too.
I think that's sort of the case, but not
Yeah,
as much as you would expect, because the body counts get really high in these threshold conflicts. Like
yeah,
I think probably close to 1 million people at this point have lost their lives in Ukraine. The casualty count is really high, and it runs for multiple years. And you know, obviously, we're seeing what's happening in Israel and Gaza.
yeah. I guess
And
from the U.S. sense, they care about like the U.S.
yeah,
Casualty,
I
right?
mean,
Yeah,
certainly,
yeah,
like
yeah.
no one wants to write letters home to mothers and fathers of U.S. service members that are killed
Correct.
in combat. I guess the question, Auren, you're obviously really familiar with this, is that Rene Girard, the philosopher that developed mimetic theory, he actually pointed this out as like a real problem. Like it turns out that these sorts of threshold conflicts are mimetic violence. It's like we're just in these kind of like locked into not no one wanting to cross the line, and it leads to these like massive body counts over time. And actually, probably if you were going to strike and you were going to, compete with certainty, you would actually just go total war from the first moment and end the conflict as quickly as possible. And the theory would be that you would actually keep the loss of life much lower than it would be if you let that conflict run over a long period of time. Peter Thiel talks about this in 0 to 1 as well in a business context. I think it's chapter 4. He says, if you're going to compete, act decisively and win as quickly as possible. And I think that's like how you break down and short circuit the mimetic rivalry that ends up being far more violent in the long term.
Yeah, I guess the flip side of that would be, let's say there's an 80% chance that you end it quickly, but there's the 20% chance that it's 100x worse or something. Like, are
Right.
you willing to take that?
If it
Yeah,
leads to nuclear war, then
yeah,
that's a bad
yeah.
gambit.
Yeah,
But I guess
exactly. And so and then
that's
you
always
never
the
know
question.
like how these things end up. Like it seems like I don't know if I trust the decision makers in the U.S. government to make that call to go all in, because I feel like it could, if it spirals out of control, it could spiral out very 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 badly.
Right. But then you have the question of like, is the way that we've supported Ukraine just at all? Like, we haven't given them the capabilities they've needed. We've given
Yep.
them the old stuff from the Cold War inventory. We've prolonged the war, but we haven't given them what they would need to decisively end it. Like, there are questions on the like
Totally. Yeah.
moral side on both of this debate.
That's right. That's right.
I'm
And
not sure I
I
have
don't
like,
know what the right answer is, but I
yeah,
don't know that it's an
yeah.
easy answer. Yeah.
It's not an easy answer. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Now now you know one of the goals of Anduril is to reduce the cost of engagement, right? High cost of engagement is it makes it hard to react harder to make decisions, but they're both like these flip sides of a lower cost of engagement world, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the reality is like if we got into a hot conflict with a great power, we would run out of munitions in a week,
It's
like
crazy.
gone. Um, and we built these
By the way, I have like
capabilities.
friends in the military who like they barely are able to shoot rounds like in
Yeah,
practice.
yeah,
Like they're not
totally.
allowed to do that because the rounds are way more expensive than they should be, and there's a limited number.
That's right. Yeah. We've built these capabilities that are incredibly exquisite. They are incredibly custom. They have really complicated supply chains. Um, And what that means is that, our partner nations like Saudi Arabia, for example, is fighting this kind of ongoing conflict with the Houthis. They've got stuff being shot into their sovereign territory and, creating havoc on a daily basis. And we cannot sell them enough Patriot missiles.
Mhm.
Like they literally have to go to other partner nations and try to buy their inventory of Patriot missiles. And then you see situations like Ukraine where we deplete not only the available inventory, we also deplete our own inventory of the capabilities that we're sending them in order to support the war effort, with no ability to actually resupply. Like the primes are literally calling people out of retirement to rebuild assembly lines, to make some of these
But
capabilities.
I've actually dived into some of like these like ways that we make shells in the United States and stuff like that. I mean, it's very archaic, and sometimes it hasn't changed in like 100 years.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we're still using incredibly antiquated manufacturing processes. Um, this is one of the things that we spend a lot of time on at Anduril is like we want to leverage commercial supply chains, to the extent possible. If you look at something like our Sentry Tower, which was the first product that we used to defend military bases as well as national borders, basically everything on the Sentry Tower is a commercial product. Like the radar is a commercial product, the camera, the solar panels, the battery systems, the power management systems, the tower itself. Like everything is a commercial product, and because of that, we have options as well. It's like if
Yeah.
one of our solar panel vendors, craps the bed, we can always go and get another one. We can go to a different optical system if we need to, so on and so forth. And I think this is like not the way that these things are traditionally done, but like if we can build our supply chain in that way at Anduril, we should be able to move significantly more quickly, and we should be able to ramp scaling and production faster as well. Another great example of this is our Barracuda missile that we launched a few months ago now. The fuselage of the Barracuda missile it uses the same hot pressing production process as bath fittings, as bathtubs.
Mhm.
And so we're not using some crazy new technology to build it. It's like, no, we're just leveraging the way that industry has done these things at scale for a long time, and making the system much more modular, so
I'm
that it
imagining these
doesn't
like
have.
bathtubs being like shot out,
It's not quite the size of a
with like
bathtub.
a
It's smaller
guy
than a
in it,
bathtub.
like being like, ah.
Yeah, no, but I mean, there are all sorts of lessons that you
Some
can
rubber
learn from
duckies
industry.
going everywhere.
That would be incredible. Instead of dropping a munitions payload, it drops
If you
thousands
dropped
of
a
rubber
rubber ducky
duckies.
on people would freak out. They would probably just run away because they would have no idea what happened.
It's very Doctor Strangelove. I love
Yeah.
it. But yeah, I think we want to go from thousands and thousands of independent parts to 10x smaller number, and be able to do that so we can produce at scale.
Just like
Um,
Tesla has done in their own factories, where just
just
the
like Tesla
number
has
of
done. Yep,
parts has gone down dramatically.
that's right. Yep, that's exactly what we should be working on.
And that also helps with like any type of supply chain disruption, because just the chance that any one part is going to disrupt goes down if you have fewer parts, right?
Exactly right. Although that doesn't mean that we can be, lackadaisical about supply chain. We have
Sure.
an entire team at
Yeah.
Anduril that's entirely focused on supply chain resilience, and we understand that that's obviously a very core part of getting the scale production story to work.
Now, the on the venture side, like Founders Fund, really probably more than almost any other well-known firm, has invested deeply in like hard tech, and that includes things like hardware and some of these other types of things. Like, how do you guys think about that vis-a-vis? How is that like just a counter positioning versus other venture firms, or is it just, or is it just really just because it's more interesting? It's core to the philosophy. Like, why is that evolved that way?
Yeah, I mean, there used to be this tagline on our website that said we wanted flying cars, and instead we got 140 characters.
Yes.
I think this is like definitely, built into the ethos of the firm. Part of this is just the kind of anti-competition idea that Peter has been preaching for the last 20 years. A lot of potentially interesting technology startups are in software categories where it would not be that difficult to build a direct competitor, which just leads to this sort of mimetic violence that
Yep.
happens in the marketplace. When you build harder tech, it's much less likely that those things become highly competitive. And so we have a kind of a philosophical tendency towards that. That said, we're also like, large investors in Palantir, Airbnb,
Yep.
Stripe,
Yep.
and a bunch of software companies. So we're certainly not focused on that as a category. Now, the other thing that's worth mentioning is that we have invested in a bunch of hard tech companies. One of the commonalities that we found between the success stories in the hard tech ecosystem is that for every incredibly talented tech founder, you really need an incredibly talented business founder alongside. It's not sufficient to believe that it's the field of dreams and that if you just build the product, everyone will magically show up and it'll just be this massively successful thing. It is not sufficient.
And you don't think
Someone's
they would be? It can't be. It's not the same person.
It's usually not the same person.
Okay.
It can be in some cases. People like Elon are uniquely
Yep.
talented and
Yeah.
that
Or
they
Carlson
understand.
Brothers or something. Right.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But generally speaking, it is undervalued in hard tech companies to have someone that has a
It's
sense for
commercially
how to.
oriented. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we try to make sure that that filter is cleared before we get terribly concentrated on the tech side of things.
Interesting. And I imagine the hard tech, like just the feedback loops are much longer, much harder to like you can go year over year and have less understanding of how the company is progressing, what's going on. Whereas like in a SaaS company, it's like it's kind of easy. You look at net retention and your growth and like maybe one or two other metrics, and you have a really good sense of like how things are going at the SaaS company. Like, what are you? Is the best way to do it just like really get diving into the product and seeing the product, or because how does one know if it takes 4 years to get like a big contract? Like, how does one know if things are progressing the right way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, on an absolute versus relative basis, it's kind of hard to define what a long time means. But
Yeah.
I will say this: the best hard tech companies tend to figure out a way to commercialize milestones. So you look at like SpaceX. Obviously, their long term goal is to send people to Mars, but that's not the only product. Like
Yep.
they're selling Falcon 9 launches, they're selling Falcon Heavy
Yep.
launches, they're selling. They'll sell Starship, taking payload to space, like lowering the cost of sending a kilogram of mass to space.
Now
Same thing with
they sell connectivity now, right?
yeah, they sell
Starlink.
connectivity
Yeah.
through Starlink. And then you have companies like Neuralink, obviously like getting to full scale human BCI is the long term goal, but they're selling basically to people with chronic illnesses that solve some problems for them along the way. At Anduril, we just recently won a contract to build the collaborative combat aircraft, which is like a autonomous fighter plane. We didn't start by selling autonomous fighter
Yeah.
planes. We
Yeah.
started by selling sentry towers.
Which
And
are like just easier to get to market, essentially.
way
Yeah.
way easier to get to, like,
So almost you have to under like the founders have to be smart enough where to get their first product a little bit lower ambition, a little higher percentage chance of being able to get it done.
right. And everything that you learn from those earlier stages is critical to the long-term goal.
Yes.
It's not that
Yeah.
you're just like building something random to finance what you're actually building. It's like you're figuring out a way to commercialize every stage of development. Obviously, there are some cases in which that's much harder, like nuclear fusion. Like, I'm not really sure how you would have
Yeah.
like milestones commercialized along the way. But for most hard tech companies,
Yeah.
you should be able
Sometimes
to
in the
figure
bio,
out.
it's hard. Just you need like
Yeah,
FDA
yeah.
approval or something. Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
some cases, but there are many cases as well where it's just like a failure of imagination,
Mm.
that leads to these companies requiring way too much capital and way too much time. That makes it difficult to leverage venture capital as an asset class to help you accomplish your goals.
Now Foundster is now closing like a $3 billion fund, which seems just so gargantuan when one thinks about like the venture world. Like, how do you think about like this money as an advantage as an investor?
Yeah, I mean, we have a growth fund and a venture fund. So
Yes.
we're currently investing out of $1 billion venture fund, and we just raised growth fund three, which is $3.5 billion growth fund. Um, I think like there are a lot of really interesting growth deals out there. Obviously, companies are staying private longer. There's enough capital in the private markets that there's continued interest in doing that, and we can write bigger and bigger checks, more concentrated checks to acquire more ownership prior to a company going out to the markets and having some sort of liquidity. Um, I think the advantage really there is that, the founders know that we're in it for the long term with them. The economics of growth don't affect our ability to deploy additional capital in new
Yeah.
businesses over time. And that strategy has worked really well. The vast majority of our growth fund deals are like concentrating into our existing portfolio rather than new investments outside of the venture fund. But at the same time, it is really important for us to have a venture fund as well. We're not just writing checks into mature growth stage companies. We are still doing seed, Series A, Series B investments. And that's kind of the top of funnel in many ways for concentrating that capital at a later stage.
And like I can imagine it, like in some ways it could be in so competing because it's like, okay, at one point there's like a $10 million check that someone could write. Another point there's like a $200 million check, and so it's like, well, it's much easier for me just to write the 200 million. Like, how does one like think about that internally? Like, how do you set up the dynamics where that $10 million check is still so valued?
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, it's like there's a kind of a gray line for where a check would come out of venture rather
That's
than
right. Good
growth.
point. Yeah.
And
And there's some
you
partners
know,
just in one versus the other or something. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're all a team, but there are a handful of people that are very growth focused, and then the rest of the fund is very venture focused. And our expectations on returns are different between those two funds. Obviously, like venture capital is a power law, particularly at the early stage.
Yep.
We have to have a credible belief that every investment we make is going to have the opportunity to return the entirety of the fund. In the growth fund, we're not underwriting to a 10x multiple or anything
Yep.
like that. So you have just a different understanding of what targets you're looking at as you're evaluating deals at different stages.
Now, most people know you as this like, a really deep thinker about venture capital, about national security, about defense tech. I also know you as someone who thinks a lot about love and family. And you wrote this piece recently talking about how technology might be destroying marriage. Like, how do you think about technology in the world of dating and modern relationships?
Yeah, I had this kind of realization a few years ago that coming out of COVID, there was this expectation that we would reestablish community and everyone would be like so happy to be out, you know, interacting interpersonally with other people. And it didn't really happen. And we still have this loneliness epidemic that's ravaging Western society. I started seeing data that was coming out of the online dating companies about, what types of people are getting right swipes, what types of people are getting messages. And then you look at like some of the most heinous, violent events that are happening in our society around mass shootings and stuff. And very often these people are, they're incels. They're incredibly lonely people who feel like they have no community, who've been rejected by their, desired sexual partners, whatever it might be. And, in 100 years ago or whatever, like people tended to pair off in local communities. It's like you have people in your school or your
Yeah.
church or your Elks Club or whatever, and people were matching because maybe they weren't the most attractive, but people thought that they were the kindest or the smartest or the funniest or the most charming. And when I go back and look at the small rural town that I grew up in Ohio, I was honestly shocked leaving high school to find out all of the people from my high school that weren't in the same social networks in my high school, they ended up getting married. And it was because they had ties. There were there's connectivity that
Yeah.
existed. Um, that kind of local maxima way of pairing off has worked in human society for thousands of years. But now we're in
Yeah.
this
Most
really weird
people like
paradigm.
married people within a couple miles of them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
This new paradigm that we're finding ourselves in is we've increased the dating pool by a lot. By like entire geographies, it's much easier to get around, so people can drive or fly short distances with relative ease. And I think what's happened is that it's created this belief that there's always someone better out there. And when you always believe that there's someone better out there, there's no issue with just like going and experiencing as many people as you possibly can, and being indecisive and getting stuck in this loop, this doom loop of loneliness. And I don't think this is good for humanity. And the solve that technology has been looking at, because I think this is like pretty well understood at this point, people understand that this has been bad for humanity. The solve is AI girlfriends, which is like, it's not how do we get people back to connectivity. It's like, well, we can't do the connectivity thing anymore, and
Yeah.
so we should solve it by giving them a person that will love, affirm, and acknowledge them in all ways without any challenge for the rest of their lives. But that's also not what real relationship is. Real relationship has conflict, it has emotion, it has drama, and I think that we're losing part of our humanity by not figuring out how to really invest in bringing people back to intimate community with one another.
But what is the solve? Just that, like, we need more like communities, whether it's people going to church together or people coming together over some sort of other kind of in person, like some sort of other shared thing that's bigger than themselves. Is that the solve?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different technology versions of
Yeah.
this solve. There are the kind of local social stuff, which trying to match people together to go out and grab coffee when they like fortuitously realize that they're close to someone else. I think there's like the non-technology solves to this, like what you said is like people, you should just go to church. I don't think people realize just how good the community is from religious experience.
Yeah.
It's actually an incredible unifier. Um, even just like the more secular version of this is like go out to a bar on a Friday and talk to a bunch of people and see what happens. I don't know, maybe that works. I know for sure that has worked for a lot of people that find
Yeah.
themselves in healthy marriages today. On the technology side, I think it's like asking ourselves tough questions about how to address some of the kind of core shallowness that exists in social networks. Like if you look at the right versus left swiping on dating apps, for men in particular, it's like very height oriented. Where like basically all of the people that are 6'2" or over are getting lots and lots of positive feedback, and anyone that's shorter than that, particularly like shorter than 5'8", is just they're getting nothing. Like there's just no positive feedback
Mhm.
at all.
Which is so
This
silly because it's like of all the things, like you're gonna like I understand, you might want to discriminate against someone for a lot of reasons and stuff like that, but like I don't know, height just doesn't seem like it would be in my top 10. I don't know,
Well, I mean,
like
you're
yeah,
speaking like the man that you are, Auren. I think if you ask most women, they would probably disagree with that. There is something about
yeah.
height in men that's very primal for women. I
I
don't really
guess
know
you're
what it
right, but it's
is,
just
but
kind of funny. Like I can understand that, like a long time ago when maybe you need to be defended or something, and but like yeah, it's like so what? So the guy's 5'4". So what if the guy's 5'4" and you're 5'5"? Like who cares? Like it's like it's usually not like I understand if you're 6 feet tall, you need someone who's at least close to that. But if you're around the same height, like who cares? Like sometimes I'll meet these like 5'1" women and they're like, I need a guy over 6 feet. I'm like, why do you need someone who's a foot taller than you? Like, it makes no
you're
sense.
you're striking at something primal that probably can't be explained. But this is like the type of thing that like I think technology should be able to help us with this. Like we can find ways to surface what makes people awesome,
Yeah. Yeah.
that isn't just tied into some like super shallow metrics. I don't know exactly what that is, but I've seen their dating apps. Like there's one called Keeper. We're not investors at Founderstone, so I don't have to issue a disclaimer there. But the whole purpose of Keeper is finding a long-term spouse. Like
Yep.
their whole goal as a company is helping people get paired off and get married, which is just fundamentally different from an incentive structure than Tinder or Hinge or whatever, where they are incentivized to keep people in the
But
system
how
for
are
as
you
long as possible.
incentivized then? Like, how does it work? Because if they do the most amazing job in the world, they like start losing all their users, right?
I think their whole, I believe, and I'm not
Yeah.
the most up to
Unless
date
you
on
get
this,
like
but it's a
paid every
success
year they're
fee.
married or something. That would
It's
be
a, it's
great.
a,
Like,
it's a success fee. It's
okay,
like
it's just a
you don't
success
pay
fee.
them, anything until they get married, and then when they get married,
Oh,
you pay
okay.
out like
Like
a real
like
bounty.
a huge amount of money or something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah. It should
exactly.
be like, yeah, like 10 grand a year, every year you're married for the rest of your life or something. Yeah.
It's like
Inflation
the
adjusted.
well, I mean, this is the like college tuition ISA thing, right? It's
Totally.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I
exactly.
love it. Yeah. An ISA for love. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, yeah, that's crazy. All right, a couple personal questions. We're starting to see more and more tech and business leaders that are becoming more open about their talking about their faith. I would say 10 years ago it was extremely rare, and now it's more common to hear that. Like, what do you think is changing in the national conversation?
Well, I mean, we're still talking about really small numbers.
Yeah,
I
still
think
tiny
like
numbers.
the
Yeah.
the weekly church going attendance in San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, is still like 5,000. So it's 800,000 people in the city, 5,000 that are weekly church going. I do
So
think that
you mean
there's
like
like
non-Easter,
yeah,
non-Christmas, kind
yeah,
of like
yeah.
average random Sunday type of thing?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I think that like there is anecdotally there's something happening. My wife and I lead this Bible study that over 100 people show up to every Monday evening, which like I can't even imagine that happening 5, 6, 7 years ago. Um, you know, Obviously this is all completely anecdotal, but my sense is that Silicon Valley went through this like weird Eastern mysticism thing for a long time.
Yep.
That it became a trope even on the HBO show Silicon Valley, where it's like CEOs having like Buddhist monks tail them around for their days, going on ayahuasca retreats, and I think that people just found that like along with money, fame, and power comes an emptiness, like a hole that is God shaped. And you can jam all sorts of stuff into that God shaped hole. You can jam psychedelics and mysticism and ecumenicalism and all sorts of
Effective
stuff,
altruism.
effective altruism, whatever
Yeah.
it might be. But it actually doesn't. There's no stickiness to it. It
Yeah.
just you just
It's
have that
it's not
emptiness.
Lindy for sure, right? Yeah.
It's not Lindy. And there's something about traditional like Orthodox religious beliefs, particularly like Judeo-Christian, that has. I don't want to say that it's like people are coming to like complete faith or anything like that in an instant. But I do think that there's something that's much stickier about traditions that have lasted for thousands of years that claim to have some sort of monopoly on truth. And I think that people are way more curious about this than certainly I expected them to be when I first came to Silicon Valley 11 years ago. But it's been a really interesting thing to watch for sure.
Because in some ways, like, there's two things that like literally every human I know is like every human I know is religious about something. They
Mm-hmm.
believe in something that that you can't really prove, that's bigger than themselves. And again, it could be Christianity or it could be effective altruism, but they believe they're religious and deeply religious about something. And the second thing is that they have some sort of yearning for community. They may not be in a community, but they have a yearning for community. And then obviously, like a traditional religion fits both. types of things. But what's the bigger one? Is it the religious piece or the community piece that you think is so important to people?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right that the everyone is religious, whether or not they think they are. Atheism is a religion.
Correct. Yeah,
It's,
it
a
certainly is.
system of
Especially the
beliefs.
way people, sometimes even like veganism can be religion if you're evangelical about it, right?
Right. Well, or if you're Orthodox, like you have a set of rules and beliefs
Yes. Yeah.
that you hold other people in your
Yeah.
community to be
And
accountable
certainly
for.
communism has been a religion for the last 100 years. Yeah.
Right. And in many cases, I feel like the faith that people, especially really intelligent people, usually criticize people inside of traditional religious practices for having is not that different from faith in science, for
Correct.
example. It's
Yeah.
like if you believe that like the world emerged from nothing, um, you have just as much evidence for that as I have to believe that that's not the case. Like you have faith in some system or process to deliver you the truth that you desire. And so I agree with you. Like everyone is religious at the end of the day. On the community side of things, I think this is like one of the most beautiful parts of traditional religious expression is that there's this kind of there's something deep inside of our souls that needs to be connected with people who share values with us. And it is an incredibly powerful way to build a community that is going to support you and that is going to be there to like hold you accountable and to bring you along as you mature and you learn. And I do think that that is like a really powerful aspect of people coming into these communities and finding that they are getting that hole
And
filled
there's something
with.
about either like chanting or singing together that also, like, I still remember every day. I'm old enough to remember every day in first grade. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the. We
Mhm.
all would get up and we'd all stand up and in first grade I probably didn't even know what any of those things meant, but there was something like very communal that we're all doing it together in a way that was like it felt very reassuring to me back then. And I assume like
Yeah.
anything where we're chanting and talking together and saying the same words together over and over again is like it's very primal. It's really human to do that.
Yeah. I mean, this is like the nature of the sacred. You see this emerge in like traditions all over the world. I think there's like a spirit orientation that happens in these community moments that they can really change people's lives for the better.
Yeah, really cool. Now, a couple of other personal questions. You have mentioned that you have a doomsday bunker. Like beyond the obvious, like food and water and stuff. Like, what do you have in that? What do you have in the bunker? Like, what's most important to keep?
I mean, my bunker is about as traditional bunker as possible. We did get like these really cool Murphy bunk beds.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's like
Oh,
you're
awesome.
not just like sleeping on cots. It's like they
Yeah,
do fold out of the wall, which is pretty great. Um, Definitely have an armory, which is a
very
necessary
important.
part.
Yeah,
Um, and I think the like next version of this that people need to start thinking about now that these systems are much better than they have been historically is like you can live a pretty modern lifestyle off the grid with battery systems and efficient solar.
yeah,
And so I think that's like something that if you're building a bunker, you should be thinking about is, how do you make sure that everything that you have in that space can be run effectively off electricity because you don't want to have reliance on natural gas or anything like that.
yeah,
Uh, that I think that's like a big part of it. But for us, when we did this, it wasn't just about the bunker. It was also about having a really great retreat for the entire family
yeah.
in a rural place because we live day to day in the middle of San Francisco. And that's really what we were optimizing for is sure, we have this like survivalist thing, but we also have a really cool house that me and my wife and my kids love spending time at.
All right. Two last questions we ask all of our guests. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
Well, I mean, I think that the nature of most conspiracy theories is that uh, it's pretty impossible for large organizations to like be competent enough to maintain a conspiracy over a long period of time. So all the traditional stuff I think is just completely ridiculous because the government is incompetent. I don't think that they could cover up the Kennedy assassination stuff. I
Yeah,
don't think
in
that they
some
could
ways, like
cover up a fake
it's
moon
almost like
landing.
more depressing that the government can't
It is
do a
way more
conspiracy
depressing.
than it could, right?
If the conspiracies were about like Peter Thiel, I would be like, okay, yeah, that's believable. He's incredibly confident and he could probably pull it off. But the federal government, come on, guys, that's ridiculous. I think most of the conspiracies that I find the most interesting are the ones about like really competent organizations like running long term campaigns that have geopolitical value. Like, I don't know,
Yep.
was Epstein a Mossad agent? That's an interesting
Right.
question.
Yeah. Yeah.
He definitely
Yeah.
didn't kill himself. We all know that, but that's not a
Yeah.
conspiracy.
Right. It could be some sort of misdirection campaign or something like that. Okay, I don't want to have the pipeline because I own a train company or something, and I'm going to use other actors to help me, do that. That would be like a conspiracy that could be done by a smart actor or something.
Yeah. Things on a smaller scale where there's less people involved, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, last question we ask all of our guests. What conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
Yeah, I was kind of prepared for this one because I knew that you were going to ask it based on your other conversations. Um, I grew up, as I said before, in a rural public school in the middle of Ohio, and I wouldn't be where I am today without the help of a lot of people, like a lot. People that gave me their time and their attention when I didn't deserve it, and I had no connectivity. I had nothing to offer, and I'm very, very grateful for that. I think the conventional wisdom is shoot your shot, right? It's like, go ask people for help, be forward. And I agree with that generally, but the contrarian take on this is there are limits. And I think some people have taken this advice to hustle and shoot your shot to an extreme that borders upon completely inappropriate. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I'm going to cold email the 100 people I want to talk to on a daily basis or an hourly basis for the next year, you've gone too far. If they haven't responded, they're probably not going to, and you
Well,
shouldn't turn
also
into a stalker.
in some ways, there in any type of exchange like that, it needs to go both ways, right?
Right.
And so I would always give some advice like, what can you offer the other? And sometimes offering them is the good feeling of them helping you, right? I'm sure there's
Yeah.
some seventh grade teacher that helped you, and they did it really because they were a good person and they really wanted to. They saw something in Trae and they wanted to help Trae become bigger than Trae thought Trae could be, and they gave you extra attention to help you along the way. But they got something out of it too, which was they got this great feeling of helping you
Mm-hmm.
as well. And the same thing now you're a different Trae. So if someone wants to reach out to you today, they're probably trying to get you as their mentor. And then it's like, well, okay, what can they offer you? Maybe they can offer you, and probably a 16-year-old can offer you something, depending on who they are. But what can, and I think they need to think that through. Okay, I'm going to bring this to the table. And so the exchange is going to be, I'm going to learn something from Trae, but Trae is going to learn something from me. And they're going to be very happy they had this meeting with me.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. And then if it doesn't work, if you don't get the response that you were hoping for, that's okay. Be gracious.
Yeah. Move on. Right.
Yeah, we got to
It's
move
like
on.
dating.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like dating.
Not everyone you date is going to be your spouse.
It's like dating if you're over 6 feet tall.
Totally.
When you have lots of options.
All right. Well, thank you, Trae Stephens, for joining us on World of DAS. I follow you at Trae Stephens on X. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you. This has been a ton of fun. I really appreciate you coming on World of DAS.
You bet. Thanks, Auren. Take care.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to World of DAS wherever you consume your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and more. And please help us get discovered by leaving a review. And check out worldofdas.com. That's worldofdas.com. And of course, connect with me on Twitter at Auren. That's AUREN. Would absolutely love to hear from you.